Good evening to you all. I'm going to talk about an overview of my project and what we planned in this educational measurement project. Here are some of the things I've managed to do in this project. And first and foremost, I have the general educational goals. The educational goals, I have the general objectives here. Each objective has three domains. For example, and this general objective is in the topic of Introduction to Biology, whereby the first topic is the learner should be able to understand that biology is the study of life. That is the cognitive domain. The second domain is that the learner should be able to appreciate that all living organisms experience common life processes. That is the affective domain. And thirdly, the third domain under that general objective is that the learner should be able to interpret the differences between living organisms and non-living organisms with reasons. That is the psychomotor domain. And the other general objective is about the topic of cells. That is, firstly, I have the affective domain. The learner should be able to appreciate that a cell is a basic unit of living organisms or things. And secondly, under the same general objective, which is the educational goal, the learner should be able to understand how the structures of different specialized cells are related to their functions. That is the cognitive domain. And thirdly, on that general objective is that the learner should be able to interpret and develop the skills of using a microscope in finding magnification. That is the psychomotor domain. And I also have the other general objective, which is GO3. And here, by the end of the topic, the learner should be able, under that topic of classification and diversity, the learner should be able to understand that classification as the sorting out of living things on their similarities, that is the cognitive domain. And the second one is that the learner should be able to appreciate the diversity of living things, all organisms in the environment, that is the affective domain. And thirdly, we have the learner should be able to interpret and develop the skills of naming organisms. That is, each organism has a Latin name consisting of the genus followed by the species name. That is the psychomotor domain. Then I have the learning objective, the specific learning objectives. The first objective is the SLOA. The SLOA is under the affective domain and it is under the general objective 1. Here, the learner will be able to recognize that biology is the study of life as evidenced by discussions in their groups and report their understanding of the term biology, and learners observe plants and animals as they identify characteristics that show organisms are living. Research and record the 7 characteristics of living things. It took 140 minutes. That is 78% of week 1 related to general objective 1, and it is under the lower levels of affective domain, which is receiving. And the second specific learning objective is affective domain. That is SLOB under affective domain. And here, the learner will be able to internalize that life processes are common to all living things, but they are manifested differently in different living organisms. As evidenced here, students will brainstorm and list what plants and animals need to enable them to maintain their life processes and discuss which life processes are common to both animals and plants and record their conclusions. This SLO took 40 minutes, 22% of week 1 related to general objective 1, and it is under the higher levels of affective domain, which is the characterization of value. And the other SLO that is, the learner will be able to explain and know that the basic unit of organisms is a cell, as evidenced by students observing prepared slides of the plant and cells, draw the cells and identify similarities and differences. This specific learning objective took 75%, 75 minutes, 42% of week 2, and it is related to general objective 2 under the lower levels of cognitive domain. The lower level is understanding. So now let's go to the overview of the summative tools. And here in the summative objectives, in the summative tool, I derived more of my questions from the table of specifications. That is, I had the multiple choice, I had the short answer, the essay, I had the fill-in test items. And here are the sample of some which I constructed in my summative. For example, this number 1 is an example of a multiple choice. You see, these ones all are examples of multiple choice questions. And here, question number 2 also shows us a sample of a true or false question, how it is supposed to be formulated. And number 3 shows us how we can shows an example of a fill-in test item. Then afterwards, these are all multiple choice questions. These are all samples as you see them. And here in my section B, I also constructed some short answer test items. As you see, all those are short answer test items. And I used the diagrams to enable my deaf learners in my classroom to easily identify, to easily also relate. And these are some of the essay questions. I set them in section C. As you're seeing, I set 2 questions of the essay items, and that is the scoring rubric, how I'm going to assess my students in the different sections. And the other thing is about how I managed to come up with the validity of my test item. How did I carry out the validity? I used the content related validity. Here, I chose content. I ensured that the sample of my work being taught is from the content I have taught in my classroom. And I used also the first validity. This, I got my fellow student teacher, Masete Kevin, and we checked out the errors that I made in the question. After correcting the errors, then I also used construct validity. Here I got an expert, one of the experts, my lecturer of biology, and helped me to show me where I made mistakes. That's helping me to correct my errors. And also I went ahead to use the criterion related validity, where I went to question papers, past papers, and those set by external facilitators in order to see its relation and the connection with a standard paper. Then reliability, in order to be consistent while marking, I did the following. I did test retest. Here I gave my students the same examination. After doing it, I gave them again that the same paper, so that I see my score. I measure the score of my students after the 2 tests. And I also use the parallel forms reliability. Here I set another paper of the same content to the same class, like the content, different content to the same class, um, different questions, but from the same content. So I set different questions from the same content, that is performance reliability, and I use the iterator reliability. Here, for example, me and Mr. Maseta and Carol, I provided them and they produced a similar rating as mine after marking the paper of one of my students. I also gave some papers to one of my classmates, Mr. Masete, student teacher, and Caroline, and they also produced the same rating as mine. So that's all I had. Thank you so much.